Reverend Dr. Marcia Ledford, Esquire. Fascinating woman. She is an Episcopal priest. She's a civil rights attorney. She is in the Detroit area. Just a fascinating discussion. Her four main principles that she advocates for: immigration reform, LGBTQI rights, human trafficking, and racial justice. While they all have, a similar kind of foundation of inequality, we talk about those pillars and how the term of social justice has really been kind of politicized and turned around. The first question I ask is the United States a Christian nation? What a very interesting response. Uh, the second point that we talk about is the separation of church and state. It's not in the Constitution. I certainly didn't know that, but we talk about uh, her role and how she advocates for these things. And another spirituality of resistance is a topic that I knew nothing about. But it's a fascinating conversation uh, with Marcia. I get to call her Marcia. She's a very impressive woman. I really enjoy talking with her. I think you will as well. Thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic, I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business? And it lasted over 25 years. Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission: how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family, in their passion, in their careers, and how it helped them. Our podcast vision: growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. So nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you too.
So, Reverend Dr. Marcia Ledford, Esquire, I've got so many questions. How shall I address you? Let's start there.
Just the first time, just go ahead and say the title you just said, and then after that, just call me Marcia.
Very good. Will do. So I'll do the introduction when we're not together. That way we can get right into it.
Yeah,
First
sure.
question I have is, I think it's a good place to start. Is the United States a Christian nation?
Uh, woo. Uh, yes and no. We since well before our inception, uh, uh, Protestantism was very much a part of our formation,
Hmm.
and part of the reasons that folks left England was for religious freedom and to get away from the strife of the Catholic Protestant conflict that had been going on for hundreds of years. And so that ethos carried over here. Now, we also, in the process, developed our own brand of Protestantism. The United
Hmm.
States has been overwhelmingly Protestant the whole time. Do I think we had a Christian theocracy? I do. A lot of people would disagree with me, but it was an unofficial one. The framers of the Bill of Rights wanted to stay away from establishing a state religion, Madison and Jefferson particularly. However, it was an ideal. Madison referred to what the Constitution was doing as the great American experiment, particularly
Hmm.
the First Amendment. But as the country became settled, which is a fraught word too with respect to our Native American sisters and brothers,
Hmm.
John Locke, the philosopher John Locke, his ideology became embedded in us, and that is the free white male, the limited government, and controlling the moral compass. And the moral compass part of that is where the Protestantism particularly comes in. Um, controlling what is moral. And we see that now, particularly with abortion and gay rights. This is really about controlling what the Protestant ethos views as moral or immoral.
Hmm.
That all having been said, with the huge influence of Protestantism on the formation and history of the United States, um, the brand of Christianity that seems to be most vocal and is most at the fore is a very exclusionary, judgmental, and racist kind of Christianity, which, to
Hmm.
my view, makes that an oxymoron. So when you see Jesus Saves being carried as a banner at the insurrection on January 6th,
Hmm.
it really does make me wonder, what is going on. Uh, that I found as disturbing as anything else that happened that day, because I'm pretty sure that's not what Jesus was about. So
I,
there's a
I would
witty answer.
suspect, yes, yeah, I would suspect you're very sure. Famous quote, I believe from Gandhi. I could be mistaken by this, but um, many something to the effect of many Christians I meet do not act Christ-like.
Yeah, he loves Christianity. The quote was something like, "I love Christianity. I am not so sure about the Christians."
That's right. That's right.
as
Yeah,
he
that was
as
it.
he witnessed the British Empire occupation and colonialization of India. Yeah.
Well, certainly. And you make a good point about the separation of church and state is not in the Constitution.
The words are not written in the Constitution. That is correct. Um, I alluded to this a few minutes ago about the anti establishment clause of the First Amendment, and it says Congress shall make no law with respect to the establishment of a religion. This was in direct response to the state religion, the Church of England, of which I am now professionally a part of as an Episcopal priest, because the Episcopal Church is part of the Worldwide Anglican Communion. So
Hmm.
that's a little bit interesting. But the founders and architects of our civil rights wanted us to be free from, um, you know, being required to believe a certain thing to be a citizen of the country. Uh, and the separation of church and state was written by Thomas Jefferson in a letter to Anabaptists about his understanding of what we were doing with the Bill of Rights, which had been enacted in 1791. So it had been in place for not quite 15 years, but thereabouts. And he believed that there should be a wall of separation between government, the state, and church, and how we do church, and how church is organized, and who runs it, and all of that. Right now, the Queen of England is the head of the Anglican Church as we speak.
Hmm.
That is part of her role as the monarch, as the coronated monarch. Um, and we wanted to get away from that. So, but people think the phrase separation of church and state is written into the Constitution, and
Hmm.
presumptively, I think they think it's in the First Amendment. That's not what it says. It says that the Congress is prohibited, and uh, later case law has included the sister states and local governments. Any form of government is prohibited from establishing a state religion. But that has been construed, if you will, Joey, to mean that we can't speak our faith in the public square.
Hmm.
The prohibition is against the government. It's not against the citizens. So yes, we can speak our faith in the public square. Look at the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. They're woven all through his work was the gospel, all through his work. Um, Cesar Chavez, who created the United Farm Workers and fought very hard for better working conditions for agricultural workers, led pilgrimages in the Catholic tradition to draw attention to the plight of people that have to work in the fields to try and eke out a living. So we have seen, and there are many, many more examples. Elizabeth Cady Stanton wrote the Women's Bible. She used religion as part of the women's suffrage movement. So it's there. We just have to think about it and recognize that we have the right to speak faithfully.
Hmm.
People say to me, "You just want to create a progressive Christian theocracy," and that's not true. Well, okay, maybe it's a little bit true. But really, what I want is for the First Amendment to operate like it was intended and to have all the voices come to the public square
Hmm.
and speak their piece so that we can work these things out together and figure out what the best ways are to craft our laws and include people. That's what democracy is about. But we're particularly bad at democracy right now. You know, the red side lobs a grenade over at us, and then the blue side, lobs one back. And so we need to just start talking to each other and debating our issues so that as many people as possible can hear and participate in our representative government by being in touch with their senators and congressperson and state representatives and so on.
Yeah, very interesting. It does seem more polarized than ever now.
Yeah, no
And
question.
it's very frustrating. And excuse me, I never remember a point where people question the news as much as they do now. And
Yeah,
so they don't know. It's more of a let me listen to somebody who believes what I do, so I can get angrier with them.
yeah,
It's very frustrating. I don't ever remember a point of time like this. I mean,
right.
I personally reserve the right to change my opinion based on evidence. Some people just tend to kind of dig in a little bit more and want to put people in boxes. It's very frustrating
Hmm.
and uh, divisive.
There's been a
Um,
real assault on the truth and the public uh, uh, source and course of information. It's very
mm,
disturbing. Uh, we know that getting the vaccine and wearing a mask helps kill this damn vaccine, this virus. But people don't want to do it and don't want to listen. And I don't understand it. I believe,
yeah.
from a faith perspective, that God has given us this knowledge and ability, science, uh, understanding, and the desire to help humanity. Those are all good things that flow from our Creator. And so, what is the big deal? You know, I guess a red light impinges on my freedom if you think about it. But I still got to stop my car because otherwise there's going to be chaos. And I have to trust that others are going to stop their car too when they have a red light.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what really infringes on my freedom are taxes. Boy, I could be doing so much better. You have, excuse me, you have such a great quote on your site where you talk about the term, how what's happened to the term social justice, and it's become just turned around. It's a highly controversial and politicized term, but the teachings of Christ are clear. Whatever you did for one of these least my brothers of mine, you did for me. We, as disciples of Christ and citizens of this country, have a right to speak out and a duty to end injustice and suffering. Seems so plain, Marcia, seems so clear to me.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. I'm not really sure what the big deal is. It's pretty obvious what's happening. Jesus gave us our marching orders and was pretty clear about it.
Yeah, very
And
clear.
his whole ministry was spent helping people who were either suffering or on the
Hmm.
margins. That was
What?
the
Sorry.
landmark of his ministry.
Hmm. Why are people fed up with the church? Why are some people fed up?
There's been a lot of scandals. I think
Right.
that's part of it. I think there's a lot of uh, leaders who bilk their people.
Hmm.
I think um, there's a lot of leaders who are extremely controlling and punitive, and there's been a lot of spiritual abuse that has gone on. I think, especially for women. I think men too have been spiritually abused. Um, but and certainly the LGBT community has been just clobbered. If you check out my website, you can see my blogs that I put up during Pride Month that address the 7 uh, sections of scripture that have been used to clobber the LGBT community over the head and make them feel terrible.
Hmm.
Um, so there's a lot of meanness that we are seeing that I think drives people away. Um, there's a lot of things that we've done wrong. There's, but there's also a lot of things that we do very well. A high percentage of our philanthropic and 501c3 organizations are affiliated with some religious tradition
Hmm.
and do very, very good work. Um, so it's a mixed bag. I get frustrated with the progressive side because I feel like we're always on our back foot. You know, like I feel like we're always on the reactive to what's going on in the more conservative, particularly evangelical corners of Christ's holy vineyard. Um, I feel like instead of putting our message out there proactively, like we interpret things differently, and we interpret them uh, to be expansive, to help the gospel expand and reach more people and be about doing good and helping each other. But instead, we react to the things that are said from uh, differing corners. Sometimes they are ridiculous. I heard a televangelist say, I didn't hear him, I read the quote, but he said that God cannot hear us pray through our masks.
Oh my goodness.
This is the stuff that is really hurting Christianity too. Um, but I think part of the bad PR that Christianity has is because those of us on the more expansive, positive, loving side of the gospel are not vocal enough.
Hmm.
And we're not talking about the wonderful opportunities that are available through our various traditions, our various denominations, to live a more inclusive, gospel expansive life uh, through the Episcopal Church, through the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, through the Presbyterian Church of the USA, through Disciples of Christ and the United Church of Christ, and it just goes on and on. There's lots of opportunities, but we're not getting the message out like we should be, and that's
Interesting.
partly why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, I want to get in more into what you're doing in a moment, but it seems like some of those voices are being they're making, is it a money thing? Is it why they're louder? They're
Oh,
attracting more?
I think some of it is about that. Some of it is about, we've seen some of these big megachurches implode because it's gotten to be much more about, money and bringing new tithers in and things like that. So yes, there is that possibility. We saw I can't think of his name right now. The recent um, uh, he recently died. Ravi, I can't think of his name, and it's been found out now that he was sexually abusing uh, lots of women.
Hmm.
It's about power. It's about money. It's about all the things that kind of influence can create in any of us, really, because absolute power corrupts absolutely. So there's a lot of factors, but I think those are some of them, and I really think that it's quite um, it's it's very troublesome to me. Um, that's not what we're supposed to be about. We're supposed to be about exploring the gospel, making it available to as many people as possible, helping people live a more disciplined um, uh, following of Jesus. Those kinds. That's what we're supposed to be about. The sacraments. Um, pastoral care in time of need. That's what we're supposed to be about.
Certainly. And it's fascinating to me. I appreciate you bringing up discipline. And Christ, of course, had 12 disciples, which means to teach, to learn,
Yeah.
correct? That's
Hmm.
the root of discipline.
Right.
But your four kind of pillars on your site are immigration reform, LGBTQI rights, human trafficking, and racial justice.
Hmm.
I mean, are there more important pillars than that? I mean, that's incredible. And do you get pushback? Do you get? I mean, that's quite a burden to take on, Marcia. I guess is what I'm trying to say. I mean, they're huge issues in our community, in the
Hmm.
world.
Hmm. I have not gotten a lot of pushback so far. Um, you know, they're all related. They're all about
Hmm.
how exploitation of others is sinful. It is a kind of systemic evil that we need to eradicate. And some of it is based on skin color, and some of it is based on gender and gender identity and sexual orientation. So they're all tied to one another in some way or another, and I have been involved in all of them directly, with the exception of anti-human trafficking at some point in my career, and so I've got a real heart for these. And then when I was in seminary, Joey, I learned more about human trafficking. I was in the Bay Area in California, in Berkeley, and an organization called SAGE came and gave a talk to us as seminarians about this problem, this huge problem. And I decided that I would incorporate it into my work uh, because I was so moved by what I learned. And I live in Michigan at the intersection of I-75, which is the main southern artery, north-south artery in the eastern United States, and I-94, which goes from the West Coast, uh, well past Michigan, and it's one of the main. It's a main artery for human trafficking,
Hmm.
and so when I learned that too, then I was even more convinced that this would be something I'm going to address. It's uh, it's such a pervasive problem. So no, I'm not getting a lot of grief. Once in a while, I will, particularly on the LGBT stuff, but not. Um, it's not been too bad so far.
You talk about, yeah, you're in the Detroit area and
Hmm.
how there's a formidable ICE kind of director there about
Yep.
immigration, and it's particularly tough in that area. Does Detroit seem to be more conservative? I don't know much about the politics there.
Well, particularly when President Obama was in office, we saw a very aggressive attitude from the ICE director. I don't know her political leanings, but I do know that despite Obama's, uh, memos basically to work on deporting criminals and people who are hurting others and breaking laws and things like that, and leave the folks who live here peaceably and work hard and all that, and just leave them alone, which was not doing. I'll give you one example.
Hmm.
We had uh, an anti-deportation protest, excuse me, at the ICE office in Detroit, which ironically is named for Rosa Parks. And it was a father of three. He had three little stair step daughters, like 9, 7, and 5 or something. And for whatever reason, the mother was out of the picture and was not going to come back into the picture. And he was brought here as a child, and so um, he was undocumented. And so, and we weren't really sure what was going to happen with these little girls were he to be deported. And they're, of course, all American citizens,
Hmm.
which I think should be a very strong factor that we should not be deporting the parents of American citizens.
Hmm.
That just really flies in the face of what I think is just. Uh, we need to honor them as citizens and make it easier for them to grow up and self actualize and all of those things, rather than making it worse and creating potentially post traumatic stress in these children, right?
Hmm.
So anyway, he got deported.
Wow.
Um, and that really did something to me. I've been a criminal defense attorney and I've been involved in some pretty gnarly cases in my life. I've seen some things that, and heard things that would curl your toes.
Hmm.
And I think that this uh, affected me perhaps more than anything else I've encountered in my working life. That these gorgeous little children,
Hmm.
uh, for really no good reason. Okay, he's missing some papers. Well, let's get him some papers. He works hard, he had a really good job. He worked hard, paid taxes that he'll never see the benefit of.
Right.
It's a racket. So the this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, which is to write and speak and teach and preach to help others, to empower others to use their gifts to become more vocal based on, particularly from my perspective, if they are Christians, based on the gospel, to call out for better laws, better laws.
And what happened to the children? Do they go into
Uh,
the
I
system?
don't know for sure because they weren't really, broadcasting that, and quite right. Um,
Yeah.
it's my understanding they are in the care of an aunt,
Uh,
but it, it's not right to kind of try and keep up with them, if you know what I mean. We have
right.
to let them be and um, not make it worse.
I'm a son of immigrants. My father came from Italy. My mother came from Nova Scotia. They met in New York City, and
Mm,
so my position is quite clear. I mean, my father didn't get a pair of shoes until he was 12. I mean, just
mm-hmm,
poor farmer in Italy, and they came over, and I can't imagine what it was like if I was young and they got deported. I mean, it's just horrible. Uh, you talk a lot about the spirituality of resistance
Yeah.
and how it empowers us to do spiritual work. Please, can you talk about that?
The spirituality of resistance involves, it's kind of a two-parter. It involves our inner work, which can be done a number of different ways. I think a lot of this is sort of based on our personality and how we function in the world and whatnot. I tend to meditate and to do uh, contemplation, journaling sometimes, prayer, those kinds of things. But I think one of the things we have to do is some inner work to determine, all right, what am I about? What really aggravates me? What what is it that's going on in the world that is just really, really bugging me?
Hmm.
In other words, what wakes you up at night? What do you perseverate? What are you just constantly rolling around in your head? Issues that really bother you. And so once we know what that is, we can then do something about it. And I'm a huge proponent of community organizing, finding entities, and they can be faith-based or not, Joey. That doesn't really matter as long as they're working on an issue that is important to you, because not all of us have the luxury of having uh, a faith-based community organizing entity near us. Okay, but if immigration is really important to you, it doesn't matter as long as you're working to reform immigration. This is the second part of it, is the public action, because
Hmm.
and in the inner work we need to assess our private power. What are the things that we are really good at? What are the things that make us tick? What are the things that we are not good at? What is the shadow side of us? What are the things that either we need to learn how to repurpose or not gravitate towards? Um, so all of these things, we take this private power, this knowledge of our private power, and we join it with others, and we amass exponentially
Hmm.
all of this power. And then we learn to resist systemic evil, evil that has either been created on purpose or has through negligence just developed on its own. And we learn how to do things together to counter whatever this system might be. um,
Hmm.
I think that you've experienced community organizing in perhaps a less formal way as you have created this foundation for your sister. And bringing the community together, the power of their dollars to come to your fundraiser, the power of having fun together and making it a really lovely family day is beautiful. It's just absolutely beautiful, and it's an example of what we can do when we use our arts and smarts and hearts and bring them all together to work on something. It becomes incredibly powerful. I mean, look at Dr. Martin Luther King. Look at the civil rights movement, what it accomplished. Look at what Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta did for the farm workers. So that's what I'm talking about. And there are two happy byproducts of doing the spirituality of resistance. One is you learn how to get rid of denial.
Hmm.
Because when people are in denial, then they seek an alternate fantasy reality. And we've seen this. We've seen this in this country during this last election cycle. And the fantastical uh, info that people have swallowed hook, line, and sinker because they don't want to deal with the reality of our society today. And then there's also avoidance, because when we avoid something, we spend a lot of energy on it instead of just naming it. And I use this analogy because I think it's especially apt right now, which is sometimes you have to lean into the needle.
Hmm.
Sometimes you got to lean a little bit into the pain in order to name it, which immediately disempowers it to a degree, and then to acknowledge it and say, okay, I'm going to work to kick your butt. Uh, so when we practice the spirituality of resistance, we learn the skills to stop denying and stop avoiding what's wrong. And that's really the beginning. That's the beginning of change. So,
Wow,
uh,
there's so much to take in there.
Roger Gottlieb has written a wonderful book on the spirituality of resistance. He's a Jewish man, and his primary focus is creation care, climate change. But the principles that he teaches in this book are applicable to any major issue, and this info will be in my show notes.
Very good. And I think what happens sometimes though is that people will generate a community and they'll kind of have one focus, and then others that come in maybe with more influence or more money start to add on there,
Hmm.
and then all of a sudden you have this organization that's, instead of focused and directed at one particular, has now widened to some areas that maybe others aren't interested in. Unfortunately, I see this happening.
It does happen because we're human beings, and things change and grow, and all manner. We are taught in seminary that ministries come and go. Ministries have a sort of a shelf life.
Hmm.
Um, they don't always, you don't always start a ministry and it just goes on forever and ever and ever. Sometimes you do, but not always. Churches are planted and start, and churches close. Uh, a particular ministry is important at the time in which it is begun, but perhaps it solves a problem.
Hmm.
And so it's time to move on and find something else to work on. I think that we can look at social activism as sort of a river. Um, and we're all entering the stream at various places. Sometimes we have to get out, and uh, because we're burned out, or we've got a family situation that requires our attention, or any number of things. We have to move. Uh, so it's okay for us to get in and out of the stream as we can. And I am a big proponent of self care. I have done civil rights work in some form or another, which I view this as. And burnout is very much a part of
Hmm.
the cost of doing business. And if you feel that you've been working with an organization and they're going in a direction that you really feel is not, you know, a walk you want to walk, then it's okay, I think, to make your position plain and leave if you need to and find something else to work on. The important thing is that none of us stops permanently. You know, that's a part of our, I think part of our Christian duty is to take care of ourselves. I mean, Jesus often went off to pray before or after some event in his life. He was taking downtime.
Hmm.
Things got pretty rough down in the Jerusalem, Judea area, and so he went up to Tyre and Sidon up in the north. In Michigan, we would say he went up north, which means you're going up for some R&R. So Jesus went up north to try and calm things down a little bit. People were getting a little aggravated with him, and he wasn't done, so he took off. We have to realize that these are natural parts of being a human being.
Hmm. Very, very interesting. Because I've served on many boards, and we raise money for a wing or for whatever cause, for hospital or for whatever it is. And the next year I get asked again. I said, well, we already raised money for that. You know, I, the, I want to kind of go somewhere else now. I don't. I kind of see this with politicians too. They're not incentived to kind of do the best they can and leave. They're incentivized to stay and stay and stay. And um, it just seems to me a little backwards. But
Yeah.
that's what happens when money gets introduced. Uh, you talked about Christ, and I get to talk to so many fascinating people, and I hear meditation is always a big theme, and
Hmm.
Christ moving like that. And what, like, given the current times now, what's the best lesson we can learn from Christ's example as Americans, and with what's happening now?
Whew, that is quite a question.
Mm,
I think even Jesus knew that he could not address all of the woes of the uh, places where he walked and taught and preached and healed. And I think we have to recognize that as well. But he also did what he could, and he went to a place, and if he needed to stay longer, he did.
hmm,
So he was flexible, but he also took time for himself to recharge and to pray. And I think that that's huge. We have to remember what our center is, and it's Jesus, it, from a Christian perspective. And if we want to work for better, we have to take care of ourselves, and we have to be realistic about what we're trying to do. And I think he had all of those qualities. He was realistic, but he was also dedicated.
hmm.
He was strong, but he also took time for himself. And that's, I think, super important right now.
Yeah, that is really, really true. We see examples of that in the Bible where he does do that. Uh, Another great point you talk about is that people of faith are theologians.
Mm-hmm.
And, I know the term, but I don't use it very often.
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk about that?
Well, I'm going to guess that you were raised in the Roman Catholic Church.
My father was kind of a churchgoer, but my mother became a Jehovah's Witness when I
Ah,
was 10.
and
Yeah,
were you involved in that?
I was.
Okay. Uh, that's a really interesting combination, I have to say. Um,
Yes.
uh, we are all theologians because theology is the study of God. And any of us who have had some sort of a religious training or formation are taught the tenets of the faith, we're taught our sacred texts, and we are taught how to apply those things to our daily life. In doing all of that, we are engaged in the study of God. And there's a really wonderful book called How to Think Theologically, which sounds really heady and academic and
Hmm.
boring. But it's actually a really nice book, and it's also in my show notes. And it's written by two seminary professors who talk about how we are all theologians, even if we don't have a bunch of letters after our name, because we are constantly taking our faith and weighing against what's happening in the world. And you hear a bit of news and you go, oh, that's not cool. Or you hear something else and you say, oh, that's wonderful. That's really, you hear about your foundation and what you're doing for your niece and nephew. And it warms your heart. It makes you feel good because you are taking care of the least of these. And that really struck me about what you're doing.
No, thank you.
Um, and so when we put these litmus tests up against current events based on our faith formation, we are engaging in theology. And
Hmm.
so we should not be intimidated by the fact that, we don't have a seminary degree because we are expected to uh, constantly measure how we are living our life out to what we are taught is right. What is the moral through line? And we're constantly, gauging whether we're to the left or the right of that
Hmm.
through line.
Yeah, that is very true. That is very true. And when you encounter atheist,
Hmm.
I have a lot of atheist friends, and
Hmm.
their points are quite clear with everything that's evil that's happening and
Hmm.
the atrocity that's happening today. How can there be? And I had, I have no comeback, and I'm not here to change anybody. I'm just, but when what happens? I mean, can atheists still be part of the church?
Well, they can always be a part of the church. It's a question of whether they want to be.
Hmm.
And, I would say your garden variety atheist does not. There's actually a lot of faithful people out there who find organized religion to be unhelpful, and
Right.
or they've had a terrible experience, or they feel that their spirituality and their faith growth is better served other ways. So it's a mishmash of all of these things. I think, of course, anybody who's questioning, who wants to say come to an Episcopal church, who I've had people in my congregation who have told me that they're atheists
Hmm.
or they're agnostic, but they still are interested. They still want to learn more. Um, and we say, part of our tagline in the Episcopal Church is, the Episcopal Church welcomes you. So everybody's welcome.
Hmm.
Whether it feeds you or not is something that each of us has to assess. I don't know if that's an answer or
Very interesting.
okay.
Yeah. What are the primary differences between Protestants, Catholic, Episcopal? I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. So there's Orthodoxy and the Roman Church, who were at one point one and split in 1054, to the East and the West. And the East became Orthodox and the West became Roman Catholic.
Hmm.
And then there was a Reformation and a number of things that happened in England. Luther put his theses up on the wall in Wittenberg in 1517, and the Reformation began. The English Reformation occurred in 1534. Um, so uh, the Episcopal Church, the Anglican Church, is a Protestant tradition because it was created in um, reaction or rejection of Rome. Henry VIII wanted a divorce and couldn't get one, so he
Hmm.
said, "Okay, goodbye," and made himself the head of the Church of England. So the Episcopal Church is Protestant, but if you were to visit an Episcopal service, you would think you're in a Roman Catholic parish because our liturgy is very, very comparable. The way that we conduct our liturgy is very similar. There's some nuances, and I won't go into those, but um, it's there's first the preaching, the word, the reading of biblical texts and preaching, and then we shift over and have communion. The Lutheran Church is very much the same way, and then the rest of the Protestant denominations have a less liturgical look and feel to them compared to us. Um, so obviously, Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism are highly liturgical traditions, and then there are some Protestant traditions like mine that are very liturgical, and then it kind of moves down to non-denominational, where it's very much defined. The worship style is defined by the congregation.
Hmm. Very interesting. And as a follower of Christ, is it important to pray and to kind of pick these different sects? I mean, I like why have all the differences?
I think a lot of it, this is just my personal opinion, but I think a lot of it has to do with personality. I think
Uh,
we all gravitate to a worship style that works for us, and we're all unique. We all have very different experiences and education and spiritual uh, history and experience. I was raised in the American Baptist tradition. All of my friends in school were Catholic, and I would go to church with them, and I just felt so much more at home
Hmm.
with the way that they worshiped. It felt right to me. When you express yourself religiously, like bowing or crossing yourself or kneeling, it's called piety, your personal piety, and that meant so much. That was so much more in line with my sense of piety and reverence. And of course, I couldn't become a Roman Catholic priest. So, and my partner at the time and now wife is was raised Roman Catholic, and so we started looking around for a church tradition that would satisfy both the liturgical need on her side and my side, and the preaching and really good biblical scholarship that I was used to. And we found the Episcopal Church, and of course they ordain women and they ordain LGBT people. So it was, obviously the right choice for me.
It's just fascinating to me that, yeah, that one part is acceptable and one part is not, certainly of LGBTQ. And um, it's a very, you know, don't at Thanksgiving, whatever, don't talk about politics or religion,
Hmm.
because it's very divisive. And
Oh yeah.
and but I enjoy talking about it because I want to hear others viewpoints. But
Hmm.
you know, like I mentioned before, my father was he was Catholic, went to church on and off. My mother became a Jehovah's Witness. I was kind of involved. I never got baptized or anything, but I did help, and I preached a little bit and I spoke. But I just eventually found that there was just so many different ways of following Christ that it just got a bit frustrating, and I didn't never really found a home.
Hmm.
Perhaps that's frustration that others feel as well.
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. And this is going to sound like a little bit of proselytizing, and I don't mean it to, but for the progressive thinker, for somebody who does not want to be put in a box where you've got to tick everything off and say, yes, I
Mm.
believe that, yes, I believe that, yes, I believe that. I think the Episcopal Church has a lot to offer. So does the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, Presbyterian Church USA. All of these are the progressive de- entities in their denominational uh, area. And one of the things I love about the Episcopal Church is we make no bones about reaching out to everybody. Uh, we typically are thinkers as a group. We love the liturgy. We love good preaching. We love all the things about worship that can be an issue for people. And so I recommend that if you are searching for a new church tradition, in other words, you just can't quite let go of Jesus, um, I recommend that you try one of these denominations, and we'll put them in the show notes. Because I think that you are in for a delightful discovery in terms of uh, the beauty of worship, the dedication to good biblical scholarship, and to the uh, mindset of inclusion, of radical hospitality and inclusion.
Inclusion. That is so powerful, and would really change the way we are now if that was if people adopted that, embraced inclusion, because unfortunately we see a lot of divisiveness now. And uh, Reverend Dr. Marcia Ledford, Esquire, thank you so much for your time today. You certainly gave me a lot to think about, and I hope our listeners as well. I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope one day to meet and maybe even have a when this pandemic is over, not hopefully meet and have a face-to-face conversation would be wonderful.
I would love that, Joey. This has been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thanks again. You be well. Bye now.
And you too. Bye bye.